Up and share a little bit about Bridge of Life and about foster care. They came and did an event a little while ago, not too long ago, and I realized how much I don't know and how much is out there in the area of foster care, and particularly Bridge of Life. Really, my heart was warm towards it. I just never knew there was such a ministry, and it really blessed me that she came and that I learned so much. And I just wanted her to share that with you guys this morning. So if you guys would, you guys get the comfy chairs. I never get this when I share. This is so good. All right, you got boom.
Oh, sorry. Which one? Good morning, guys. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jillian Raber, and this is Jodi. And just to intro her a little bit in this ministry, she is such an inspiration to me. This ministry is such an inspiration. And not to take up time with my story, but as Trent and I are going through our story with forming our family, the Lord has just brought foster care to us and is really just kind of foster care and adoption, and just kind of dumped it in our lap. And as I started to dig through what was available in our area, I found Bridge of Life, and I was just taken aback, like, wow, like this is what families need. You know, we all need support. We all need someone who's going to come and cover us when we have a bad day. We all need someone to come and say, you're doing a great job, keep going. So yeah, this is Jodi, and we're just going to have a little interview here and get to know her a little bit more. So, oh, and we're going to watch a video first. Thank you for reminding me.
I remember us talking about adoption before we were ever even married.
I knew in high school that I was going to have a son from Africa.
We thought that we would have biological children first, and then we would pursue adoption. We went to an orientation regarding foster care, and I was crying, I think, probably the whole time, and we got into the parking lot, into our car, and we looked at each other. We said, we just know that this is what God has for us.
As we came into contact with these families at our own church who were foster parents or who had adopted in one way or another, suddenly became real for both of us. I think it wasn't just a number or a statistic that was out there in the community, but they were kids that we knew, that we were interacting with on a daily basis. And so suddenly we found ourselves having these conversations about, why have we made these rules in this timeline? Why is this not something that we're stepping into now?
Matt looked at me and said, why are we not doing this? You know, we didn't have our own family started at the time, and we had the space, we had the resources, so it was really one of those things we couldn't say no to once we heard of the need.
We pursued foster care not as a means to adopt, but really we got to a place where we were just led to do it as ministry.
There was a period of time where we had a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 6-year-old.
Mm-hmm. In our case, so we adopted Owen and Lily and Emma.
We adopted our son Isaiah, who is actually just 4 months younger than our biological son Mason, who's our oldest. We traveled to Uganda when he was 15 months old to unite our family.
Several years later, we're a much larger family after adopting 6 kids that are all siblings.
Once you foster or adopt, it becomes, at least for us, a really personal thing, you know. So with Isaiah, we were in Uganda for a number of weeks, and we went back to his baby's home before we left. And it, you know, in that moment, every single one of those kids was Isaiah.
Once this touches your life personally, I don't think you can ever turn a blind eye towards it. And so it never becomes not heartbreaking to hear another news story of a child that's been hurt. You have such a passion once your life is impacted by this to be able to share it with other people.
The more we were involved in foster care, the more that we saw that a lot of people didn't know anything about it, and God just kept putting on our hearts to just to kind of get the word out about the needs.
There are more kids today coming into foster care in our area than any other region in the state of Florida.
A lot of times people just aren't aware that we have a significant need for safe places for kids here locally. We also recognize that not everyone's called to foster and adopt, and that's one of the things I love about Bridge of Life is we're not trying to strong arm anybody into making that decision. We feel like everybody has something to offer, but everybody's something is different. And so we just really put the word out there, letting people know, hey, we have this need. Maybe it's something you can step into. Maybe it's not. But if you feel compelled to action in one way or another, we have a place for you. There's some place that you can serve. And everybody has a piece of the puzzle where they can really step in and support these kids.
Not everybody's called to foster and adopt, but we feel strongly that everybody can do something to help out.
Whether that's, pray for a family or go serve in a shelter, to go support a foster family or be there for an adoptive family when they return.
It could be volunteering, swinging a hammer, helping fix up a room for a family to take a placement, making meals to deliver to families.
They sound like minor things, but they could be what keeps a family from being able to foster or adopt. And so those are actually really big, significant changes that we can make and impact a child's life.
There's a place for everyone to use the resources, the talents, and the skills that they have. And when people do things that they wouldn't normally do for the Lord, His power makes a way. And that way, in our case, is for kids from tough places to be loved, to be in homes where they are cherished, to learn good values and to chase after their dreams and their purpose in their life. We think that's what every kid deserves.
We want kids to know that there is a hope, no matter what their situation is, that God loves them.
Adopting 6 kids, we expected people to say things like, you're crazy, you can't do that. And instead, our community said, we'll babysit for you and we'll bring you groceries. We want every family who raises their hand and says yes to foster care or adoption to feel the same level of support that we felt and to be loved on and cared for by the community.
We don't have all the answers, but we know our purpose, we know our call, and we're going to keep showing up because I know lives depend on that.
Well, welcome again, Jodi. And so just tell us maybe a little bit about yourself. Were you and your husband always interested in adoption, or was this something God just kind of dropped on you, or
One of his sneaky plans.
yeah?
So I had the opportunity as a senior in high school actually to spend a semester in Haiti working at an English immersion school. And so I found myself in a new place with new people and some time that I wasn't accustomed to as a teenager. And so while I was there, I actually read an autobiography by a man who had been horribly abused as a child, and he ended up writing 3 books, but it was a child called It. And I remember reading that book, and it deeply impacted my life. And even as an 18-year-old, I remember thinking that's a future that I want for my family, is to be able to help children who grow up in situations where they're not loved and where they're not cared for. And so my husband now was my boyfriend at the time, and so even then we talked about our future and that we wanted it to include foster care or adoption. He was very leery of fostering at that point, and I think that's a really common response that we hear from a lot of people is, how could I love a child and let them go? But he knew some people who had adopted, and so he was favorable towards that, and so that was just sort of like almost like a prerequisite conversation that we had before we got married was, are we on the same page with this? Because we both felt like it was a pretty big deal.
So you referenced it a bit in the video, but you said something about like the rules that you had or whatever. Like, what was that, or like how did that play out?
Sure. So after we were married and we started to think about what our family looked like from that point forward, we still knew there was either foster care or adoption in our future. But, a lot of people who are really smart, have done a lot of research about the ideal family makeup and situation and all of these kinds of things. And so leaning into that wisdom, we established some rules that we thought made a lot of sense for us and for our future children. And so we wanted to have our own biological children first. And our desire was to, grow them in the Lord and to get them really rooted and established, and for them to have a strong spiritual foundation before we brought in children who had come from traumatic situations. And so one of our rules was that we were going to have our own children, and they were going to be probably middle school or high school before we entered, the arena of foster care or adoption. We also had in mind that we would, help a child. Like singular one was kind of the limit, and that we weren't going to disrupt the birth order. That was our third rule, because there, again, have been some studies on potential detriment to kids when you have birth children and then you bring in children who are older than those kids. So those were our three rules, and through a series of events, I think God broke down every single one of them. And so doesn't he just do that? And his ways are better than our ways. And so I was serving at the time. We had moved to Florida. My husband's a full-time worship pastor at another church here in town, and I was serving as the full-time children's pastor. And so we had 2 young kids. They were 3 and 1, and we were in ministry. We had just bought our first house. It was 1,100 square feet. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. First house in our minds, only house. We were, that was going to be it for us. And we, as a children's pastor, I was obviously in contact with kids a lot. And our church has had just this incredible history of foster care and adoption kind of woven throughout. And so on a typical Sunday morning, there would be probably half the kids in children's ministry were somehow impacted by foster care or adoption. We had 13 families in our church at that time who were either fostering or who had adopted. And so it was a huge piece of the DNA of our church. And so we started, getting invited to children's birthday parties and other celebrations and things like that. And it was constantly in our face. There was one particular event where we were the only traditional family there. All of the other families were somehow impacted by foster care or adoption. And so we started to question, why have we made these rules in this timeline? And what is it that we can do to kind of step into this now?
I love that. We had 3 rules, but this happened and this happened. Yeah, that's awesome. So definitely had a plan for it, but did not pan out how you were planning. I think in one way or the other, everyone has that story of we had the plan and Jesus was nope. So you talked about your church having so many families, foster families, adopted families. So when you guys decided to adopt, how were you supported as a family?
Okay, so our initial decision was to foster. And I think that's something worth talking about, just because a lot of people have confusion about what is the goal of foster care. When you hear about kids who were in foster care and now they're adopted, how did that happen? And so the goal of foster care initially is always reunification. So someone suspects that there's child abuse, neglect, or abandonment. They make a call. And by the way, that's something that anybody can do. You don't have to know for certain that abuse is happening. You just have to have a suspicion or even an uneasy feeling. And thank goodness it's not our decision to decide that. There are professionals in our community who are trained to go in after they receive a call and say, hey, this is an unsafe situation. We need to remove this child. Or this is a situation that we need to keep our eyes on. We can support the family in some way and the child can stay here. And so when removals happen, that's called out-of-home care, dependency system. Foster care is kind of the common term. But what they try to do is always place a child who's removed with a relative first or someone who's known to the child. So that could be a grandparent or an aunt, a school teacher even. But you can imagine how traumatic that must be for a child to be removed from his or her birth parents and then to be placed with a stranger. So, when at all possible, we want to be able to place that child with someone who's known to them. And then case managers are involved. A case plan is established with things that would support the family so that reunification can happen. So the goal is always reunification. So if there's a drug issue, we look at dependency, rehabilitation. If there's a homelessness issue, if there's a joblessness, whatever those reasons are that made the home unsafe, the case plan is specific to the family and addresses those particular needs in order to be able to reunify that child. So, and a case plan typically lasts 12 to 18 months. So when you hear about kids who linger in foster care for a really long time, that's not the ideal, and that's not the way the system is set up. But sometimes parents will do just enough in order to receive an extension, and then just enough again. And there are all kinds of other components that happen. So anyway, we did step into the world of foster care. And so again, our idea was that we would, foster a child. There was a family in our church at the time who had a sibling group of 3. They were 8, 13, and 14 girls who had been placed in a shelter. So shelter status happens when you can't identify a relative or a non-relative, and you can't find a residential foster home. Like when we think of traditional foster parents, you can't find even a foster home in order to take those kids. So we do have group homes and shelters in our area, which I think surprises a lot of people. It's a modern day orphanage.
Yeah, I don't think, at least in my experience of talking to people about foster care, a lot of the people in the area don't realize how overwhelmed our system is right now with foster kids, and that it's to the point of needing shelters and group homes and stuff like that, where, they'll have maybe one, like a foster parent couple, and then they might have 10 kids because they don't have 10 homes to send them to. So they have to condense and have these group homes and these shelters. So a lot of people aren't aware of how overly saturated our area is with these kids that need homes.
Right, and even the situation that you mentioned is an ideal compared to, there are shelters where there's shift staff. So it's not even like a designated set of committed parents, but it's workers who are coming in and punching a clock for 8 hours and then going home. So not an ideal situation for kids who already have a lot of uncertainty, and and then they're dealing with different caregivers and expectations. But our eventual 3 older girls, they initially were placed in a shelter, which is, supposed to be an overnight or a weekend until we can find placement. And they'd been there for several months. And so a family in our church had agreed to foster them. And because I was a children's pastor, she was, kind of saying, hey, this transition is happening with our family, and I'm kind of nervous about it, and it's a lot of kids, and 2 of them are teenagers, and we've never had teens. And so I went to the home on the day that the case manager was bringing the kids to drop them off, which was just kind of a weird, again, and as some of you, I don't want to act like nobody here is impacted by child welfare, because I've spoken with enough congregations to know some of you have lived this or have experienced this in one way or another. But for those of us that haven't, just imagine being 14 and being removed from your family and then being dropped off at a stranger's home. Like, just so many things going on there. But I went to the home and just took a couple of meals, took some, youth Bibles and, things that you think you're supposed to do when you're a children's pastor. You're just trying to help in some way. And so as we got to know those girls, and because they were teenagers, they should have been in youth ministry, but they kind of knew me from that first interaction. And so they were hanging out in children's ministry on Sunday mornings and, kind of helping and that kind of stuff. And as we got to know them, we realized that they were talking about these other brothers and sisters that they had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's what we said. So they had a 2, 3, and 5-year-old siblings that had also been taken into care. And younger children are easier to place, but not always together. So all of those kids were able to go into a traditional foster home with committed foster parents, but in 3 different counties. And so they weren't getting their sibling visits. They hadn't seen each other in a really long time.
So it was 2, 3, 5, and
8,
then
13, and 14.
8, 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So this foster mom who had taken them in said, wouldn't it be great if you guys fostered the little ones and we got them all together? And
we could have them all closer.
Right. And we didn't think that sounded great, really, at all. Our kids were 1 and 3 at the time, so that was 5 preschoolers. And so we, we're not as enthusiastic about the potential for that.
Pump the brakes on that.
But we had started our foster parent classes, and so we decided to continue on. And it's not like that's a decision that one day you wake up and say, hey, I think this is a good idea. But just over time and through relationships and prayer and all of those things that work together, those little three became our first foster placement.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how did that work? I'm just curious, so did you reach out and contact someone and say, hey, we want to pull all these three kids and just have them all?
Yeah, we contacted their case manager. So it's
Okay.
one case manager over all 6 kids. So
Okay.
a case manager will be assigned to the whole family. And so for them, knowing that the benefit, first of all, of siblings being together is really important, but also just the efficacy of his work, because he didn't want to have to go to a shelter in 3 different homes in 3 different counties in order to serve one family.
Gotcha.
So as much as we can consolidate, we also just work more efficiently.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow. So briefly, so how did you get from, okay, so you're fostering the 3, and then you have the older 3 that are in your church. How did that happen to get all 6? Because, oh my gosh, 6 plus 2.
Right. So our kids' birth parents had a case plan, and they had 12 months to complete it, and it ended up taking about 18 months in order for the judge to say they had not made significant enough progress in their case plan. And so termination of parental rights is what happens next. So when you hear about kids who have been in the foster care system and then they've been adopted, that's when the case plan was not successfully worked. And so the judge can terminate the parents' rights to their children, which is, again, just a really sad thing that happens, but it does happen, in order for kids to, then their goal changes to permanency. So that can look like guardianship with a relative or adoption. So our kids' plan then was changed to adoption. And again, just always trying to get them together whenever possible.
Gotcha. So when did you first come into contact with Bridge of Life, and how did that really play a role in this the early stages of you guys accepting these kids?
Sure. So I referenced it in the video, but our church has just been amazing, and our friends and our family have rallied around us. I mean, this is 11 years ago at this point. So, we've done a lot of life since then, but we still have friends and family who do special things with our kids all the time and help in really meaningful ways, like yard work and teaching our kids to drive. 6 of them are in the house still, and they're all teenagers. So pray for us. But, we have people who are like, hey, I used to teach driver's ed. Do you want me to teach your kids how to drive? Yes,
Oh, wow.
absolutely. I used to be a swim instructor. Just really practical ways that people have wrapped around our family. But one person in particular, she would take our kids and just do play dates and different things with them. And one day she had taken them to a Bridge Life event, a parents' night out. So we host, through different churches, we host free parent night out events for foster and adoptive families, just to give them 3 or 4 hours of knowing their kids are in a safe place with people who love them, who are background screened and trained and all of that. And so they can get a date.
It's a huge gift.
It's huge, yeah. So she actually took our kids for us. And so then I got on Bridge of Life's newsletter through that. And, many years had passed and a lot of different things. And I just knew one day I have all these kids in my house. I'm doing full-time children's ministry. At some point, that's just a lot of kids. But my heart is obviously for kids. And so what can I do that's maybe not in children's ministry, but still helping families? And so I had been added to that Bridge Life newsletter through that event and found out they were hiring. So that was really my first connection with them, was through the interview process.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just so in awe. Anyway, we'll continue. What would you say to someone considering foster care or adoption? Would you have any words of advice, or what would you say to someone who's considering? I know from personal experience that I feel like there's a transition period from where you have the inkling in your heart of like, wow, there's kids out there that need love. And then at least for me, there's this secondary stage of what is this going to look like for me? And God, how do you want to use me in this area? Or do you even want to use me? Like that's like your first question, like, okay, is this even for me? And so like, I know there's a mental and a spiritual process with that, but what would you say to people that may have that thought in their heart, or like we were involved with the youth group here, and I've talked to lots of the kids at youth group, and they say to me, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to adopt one day. So there are, and I was like that too when Trent and I were dating. We talked about adoption, but like you, we had the 3 steps. We're gonna get married, we're gonna have 2 or 3 kids biologically, and then we're gonna adopt, and then we might have some more kids, and we might adopt. Like we had this whole plan. So I know there are people that from a young age have the thought, and then there's people that just see the need and may have the thought. So what would you say to people in that scenario?
Yeah. I think the number one thing is whatever questions or concerns you have, to talk with someone, whether it be me or somebody else who will be able to shed light on what those questions are. A lot of people put hurdles in place, they're perceived hurdles, and they're really not there. So they'll say, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too single, my house is not big enough, I don't make enough money. And a lot of those barriers can be overcome. So don't make assumptions about your situation. Some of the best foster parents I know are retired and, in their 70s.
Yeah, we know a couple who are in their Trenton 80s, late 70s, and they fostered to adopted a young boy, so age is not a factor.
Yeah, and a lot of people have concerns about their home or their finances or things like that. So, there are all kinds of tools and resources in place to be able to address those, and a lot of times they're just not barriers at all. So, I would say if you have that, let's work it out and at least talk about it and see if it's a real barrier or not, and then go on from there. I hear a lot of people say things like, somebody just dropped a baby on my doorstep, and I'm like, that's probably not going to happen, but the need in our community really is there. We're typically 100 beds short of being able to provide for the amount of kids that are being removed. So
is it 100 beds short?
Yeah, so that's in the Tri-County area, so Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. That's the 12th circuit, which is how our child welfare system is regulated.
Organized into circuits.
Right. So in that 12th circuit, we need about 100 more beds in order to meet the demand. So until that happens, we have kids who are in shelters. And a lot of times we have kids who are being displaced to other areas that can support them, like Miami or Jacksonville or Tampa. So then you're adding a more traumatic situation on top of, so you take that same teenager who's lost access to their biological family, who then is placed with a stranger, but in Tampa, so they've also lost maybe their job, their high school, their friend group.
Siblings.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what would you say maybe to people that for one reason or another, say like, foster care isn't for me, because that it is kind of a select thing. What would you say to people that maybe fall outside that category?
So I think there's so many other ways that you can help. Some programs that Bridge Life offers that make it really easy to volunteer. So we do the Parent Night Out, and we have 3 or 4 different churches right now in our area who offer like a once a month or a once every other month date night. So a lot of people are like, I would love to be able to just spend some time and love on these kids. You can volunteer at another church in order to help out with those events, or we have churches who say, hey, that's an interest to us, maybe we'll start something like that here. Bridge Life offers a training once a month called The Gathering. So when you are a licensed foster parent, you have to receive so many relicensing hours every year to stay current. And we have a ton of adoptive relative care, even professionals who come to that because they're receiving excellent training on child welfare issues and how do I parent or care for a child who comes from trauma. So during those trainings, we also offer childcare, so that's another way to get involved. We have a program called Hammer Time, so we use handy men and handy women who go into homes and do home improvement projects, and that could be anything from like just yard work to renovation type things, electrical, plumbing, all of that kind of stuff. So we try to rally volunteer laborers who can address some of those home needs so that families can focus more on the kids who are in their care and less on the leaky faucet.
Right. Yeah.
We have people who put together and deliver freezer meals. So if you receive a placement at 3 o'clock in the morning, you or your case manager can say, hey, dinner would be really helpful tonight. And so we have volunteers who package and deliver meals, just trainings and ladies' night out and other things like that. So all of those are programs where you could plug in easily. It's not something that your church would have to start, but you can say like, hey, I'm going to go to the Bridge Life website. I'm going to look at their upcoming events. And it's just like a church. In order to make those things happen, we rely on volunteers. But I also like to just kind of throw it out there that just like a church, you also have probably someone who puts together your bulletin that's a volunteer or helps clean or set up, or there are all those kind of support type roles that happen that make a church successful. And it's the same with a nonprofit like Bridge Life. So maybe you fit in really nicely with one of our programs and you can just plug right in as a volunteer, but maybe you have some other skill set or resource that would be an asset to what we're doing.
When I first discovered Bridge of Life and I scoured the website, like I read every single page. I was like drinking it up. I really felt like I connected with it because I'm a very practical person, and especially like when I see a need, or if I need I see someone who needs loved on, my instant reaction is like, okay, what are their practical needs? Let's not do fluff, let's do like, what do you need, and let's fill that, and we'll strengthen you from the bottom up instead of just piling on stuff that is superfluous. So I really saw I just felt really connected with Bridge of Life because I'm like, it's freezer meals, it's babysitting, it's household projects, it's training. Trent and I went to the gathering a couple months ago, the monthly training, and we were both just really blown away. Number one, by the community, just being in a room with all these other couples who are laying down their lives and serving the Lord as foster parents. But I was really also blown away again by, you said, the training. It's very, very high level training, and these kids need very specialized care. They need very specialized attention, and that training is really helping and bolstering those foster parents that are on the front lines of dealing with these kids that may have impairments, may have issues, may have emotional trauma. So yeah, I was just blown away, and I really like your slogan of not everyone can foster, but everyone can do something. And there's a lot of, like, I've heard stories of there's these foster kids that, like, they don't have beds. They'll get placed with a household, but maybe the household doesn't have enough beds for them. And it's just having that community of them being able to reach out to someone and say, hey, does anyone have a toddler bed or a twin bed or something like that? And it's just really practical things that a lot of us don't think about. And a lot of us that have the ideal, perfect situation with our kids or grandkids, we don't think about. But I really love how you guys are just standing in the gap and surrounding foster families. So,
Thanks. And I know, like, we say foster and adoption because it kind of rolls off the tongue and those go together. But I like churches to know, too, that all of our services are available for relative and non-relative caregivers as well. A lot of churches have people in their congregation who are caring for kids that aren't their own. And it may not be a traditional foster care situation, but it's a grandma caring for grandkids, or a situation like that. So, please let people that you know who are in those kinds of situations know. They can request a meal or a home improvement project. They can attend a training. A lot of times it's the relatives and the non-relatives who really need the training the most, because they didn't necessarily feel a call into this. Like, family circumstances happened and they ended up with children unexpectedly. And so they really almost need more resources because they came into it
like secondhand, like secondarily. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really great point, and it's something we don't think about often, like, the grandparents or the aunt and uncles that live down the street or something like that they need the training as well. Well, thank you so much for coming, Jodi, and I'm really thankful to Kent and Kirsty and just everyone here at the church that's been very open to just my heart of bringing awareness about this issue. I just thank you so much for you guys' attention and your time. And I just want to say that it really can start really small. And the feeling, the thought, just thinking about these kids in these situations, it can start really small. And I just want to encourage you guys to not put that thought out. Like you were saying, don't just discount it because, like, oh, I don't have the space or I don't have the whatever. Like, please come talk to me, come talk to Jodi or Kent. We're really excited about moving forward in this and trying to connect with our community, because this is a very high need area. And I really see the value in filling the need of our community. As the church, we're not supposed to be just inside the four walls doing our own thing. We're supposed to be looking out and saying, okay, what does our community need? What can we fill for them? And then also bring the word of God along with it and bring our testimony along with it. So this is a huge area. This is like a massive bullseye, I think, of an area where we can really come along these people, come along these kids, and really bring Jesus' love to them. So, thank you very much.